The rancher lifted a wounded native girl onto his horse. The next morning, he awoke bound to a tree. Dust swirled in the early morning sun, and the smell of dry grass hung thick in the air. Caleb Arden rode slowly along the ridge, his horse's hooves crunching over the rocky ground. It had been weeks since he had seen another human beyond the occasional distant homestead. Solitude was the only companion he had grown used to. Caleb was tall and lean, with sun-baked skin and hands rough from years of tending the land and managing his ranch. His eyes, a sharp gray, scanned the horizon constantly. He knew every ridge, every stream, and every dangerous hollow in the plains. Life here was harsh. Survival depended on attention, instinct, and a touch of stubborn luck. That morning, he had intended to check the northern fence lines for damage. The metal posts groaned in the wind, and the wire shimmered faintly as it caught the sunlight. He guided his horse, Braun, toward a small ravine where he sometimes spotted stray livestock or the occasional wild creature. As he approached, a movement caught his eye. It was subtle at first, a flicker of color in the shadow of a rock, but it was enough to make Caleb halt Braun and peer closer. At first he thought it was a deer or a small native animal, but then he saw the figure move, awkward and weak, staggering slightly. It was a girl. Not human. She was small, maybe 12 or 13 by human standards, with skin that shimmered faintly in the sunlight, almost as if it were dusted with silver. Her eyes were large, dark, and luminous, reflecting the sky in a way that made Caleb blink in surprise. Her hair was fine, almost translucent, and clung to her face in damp strands. She was injured. He could see the bloodstain on her shoulder, and her limp told him she could not walk far on her own. Caleb's instincts told him to be cautious. He had heard stories from settlers about native species that were territorial, aggressive, or even deadly. But something in the way she looked at him, wide-eyed, terrified but not hostile, made him hesitate. He dismounted slowly, hands raised just in case. Braun nickered softly, sensing his rider's tension. "Hey there," Caleb said gently. "I won't hurt you. Can you walk?" The girl made a strange, low sound, almost like a whisper, but Caleb could not understand it. Her limbs trembled and she swayed as if standing was almost too much for her. Caleb's mind raced. He was alone, far from any help, and yet he could not leave her there to die. He glanced around, noting the uneven terrain. Carrying her would be difficult, but Braun could help. "All right," he said, more to himself than to her. "Looks like I'm your ride." He carefully lifted her onto Braun's back, supporting her under her arms and trying not to jostle her injured shoulder. She stiffened at first, then relaxed slightly as Caleb murmured softly, reassuring her in tones she could sense even if she could not understand his words. Braun shifted beneath the added weight, but Caleb was experienced. He mounted behind her, keeping a firm hand on her side to steady her. Slowly, he guided them toward his ranch, a small cluster of metal and wood buildings visible in the distance. The ride was quiet except for the rhythmic clop of hooves and the occasional sigh from the girl. Caleb could not read her expressions, but he noticed how her body seemed to relax when they passed through open areas, and how she tensed whenever the wind shifted sharply. He suspected her species was highly sensitive to sounds and movements. By the time they reached the ranch, the sun was higher, burning away the morning haze. Caleb dismounted and helped her down carefully. She stumbled a bit, and he caught her just in time. She looked at him, then at the buildings, and finally nodded slightly, a gesture he took as trust. Inside the main cabin, Caleb set her on a blanket he had spread on the floor. He brought water in a tin cup, and she drank eagerly, shivering as she did so. Caleb worked quickly, tearing clean strips of cloth from his shirt to make a bandage for her shoulder. She winced when he cleaned the wound but did not resist. As he worked, he glanced around the cabin. The walls were lined with tools, hunting gear, and dried herbs. The place was simple, functional, and a little lonely, much like its owner. He wondered what kind of people she came from, why she was out here alone, and how she had gotten hurt. Hours passed. Caleb tried speaking to her, offering simple words, gestures, and even pointing to objects to communicate. The girl mimicked some motions, tilted her head at others, and finally drew a small symbol in the dust on the floor. Caleb frowned. It was intricate, precise, and unlike anything he had seen. Her people were clearly intelligent and not merely primitive. When night fell, Caleb built a small fire outside, careful to keep it low. Brawn grazed nearby, ears flicking at every sound. The girl sat on the blanket inside, eyes wide as she watched shadows dance across the walls from the firelight. Caleb thought he saw a flicker of fear in her gaze, but also curiosity. Sleep was difficult that night. Caleb kept one hand on his knife, the other resting on Braun's flank. He listened to the sounds of the plains, wind through the rocks, distant calls of unknown creatures, and the soft rustle of movement near the edge of the ranch. Somewhere out there, someone or something was watching. He tried to imagine what the future would hold. This girl, injured and alone, depended on him now. If her people discovered where she was, would they come in anger? Or would they understand that humans in this remote corner of the galaxy could be allies as well as strangers? Sleep eventually claimed him, though lightly, in fits and starts. He dreamed of stars shifting overhead, of strange shapes moving among the plains, and of the girl's eyes glowing faintly in the darkness. When dawn broke, the plains were bathed in gold light. Caleb awoke, heart-pounding, to find Braun restless and the girl still asleep, her small chest rising and falling steadily. He felt a sense of unease. Something was different. The wind carried a strange scent, metallic, sharp, and unfamiliar. Caleb scanned the horizon. Nothing moved, yet he felt eyes upon him. He shook off the unease, attributing it to exhaustion and worry. The girl needed care, and he could not allow fear to distract him. He fed Braun and prepared breakfast, trying to keep the fire low. He thought about the coming days. He would need to find a way to communicate with her, understand her people, and ensure that they did not see him as a threat. Caleb knew the galaxy was vast, and humans were only beginning to make their mark in this frontier. But here, in this lonely, windswept place, the stakes felt intensely personal. As the sun climbed higher, Caleb glanced toward the distant ridges. He knew that in the next few days, every decision he made would matter. He had rescued the girl, yes, but whether that act would bring friendship or danger was a question he could not yet answer. For now, he focused on the simple things: water, food, warmth, and watching over the small being who had entrusted him with her life. The encounter had changed him, subtly but profoundly. He felt the weight of responsibility, the thrill of discovery, and the stirring of curiosity about a species far beyond human understanding. And somewhere in the silent plains, he sensed that this was only the beginning. The morning sun filtered weakly through the thin clouds as Caleb Arden slowly stirred awake. His muscles ached in ways that made him wince. For a moment he thought he was still in his cabin, tending to the wounded girl. But the cold, damp air and the rough texture of bark against his back told him otherwise. He tried to move his hands. They were tied behind him, pulled tightly so that any sudden motion caused sharp pain to shoot up his arms. Panic rose, but he forced himself to breathe steadily. He was awake, alert, and alive. That was the first step. Caleb's eyes adjusted to the dim light. He was not in the cabin. He was outdoors, surrounded by towering trees with thick trunks. The canopy above was dense, and the filtered sunlight created shifting patterns on the forest floor. His legs were tied as well, and a thick rope around his torso pressed against him, pinning him to a tree. "Okay, think," he muttered under his breath. He squirmed carefully, testing the ropes. They were strong, likely made with materials he had never handled before. Not ordinary cordage. Someone or something had done this with care. Caleb's mind raced. Had the girl's people captured him? Had they returned while he slept? He shook his head, trying to sort through possibilities. His instincts told him this was not just an attack. It felt measured, almost like a test. The sounds of the forest were strange that morning. Birds called out in unfamiliar patterns. Leaves rustled, but not from wind. Footsteps. No, too light, too deliberate. He strained his ears and caught a faint hum in the distance. A vibration in the air, almost like a song or signal, but not one he could understand. Bron was not nearby. Caleb realized that the horse must have wandered off when he was captured. That added another complication. He needed Bron if he hoped to escape the forest alive. Caleb closed his eyes briefly, forcing himself to calm down. Panic would not help. He had faced danger before, had survived storms, predators, and hostile humans. This, whatever this was, required the same thing: patience, observation, and cleverness. He began to examine the ropes and the tree. The bindings were high enough that he could not simply roll out. They were tight, yet the knots were not overly complex. A challenge, yes, but one that could be overcome. Caleb's fingers traced the ropes, noting friction points and how the fibers responded to pressure. Hours passed as he tested small movements, stretching the ropes against the trunk, listening intently. The forest around him remained eerily quiet except for the occasional rustle. He could feel the weight of unseen eyes always watching. Then he noticed something unusual. Marks on the bark, scratches, shallow but deliberate, lined the tree above him. They were patterns, not random. Someone had left a message or a warning or perhaps instructions. Caleb frowned. If these were from the girl's people, then she had tried to communicate, and he had failed to understand it. Caleb's stomach growled. Hunger was a concern, but more pressing was understanding his situation. Why had they captured him instead of attacking outright? What did they want? And most importantly, could he escape? Movement in the corner of his eye made him freeze. A figure stepped into the dappled sunlight, a small, lithe being, similar to the girl he had helped. The same silvery skin shimmered faintly in the morning light. Their eyes were large, dark, and intelligent, observing him carefully. Caleb kept his expression neutral, showing no fear. His mind raced, trying to interpret the figure's gestures. They did not approach him aggressively, merely circled at a safe distance. Every step was deliberate, measured, as if testing his reactions. Finally, the figure stopped and raised a hand in what seemed to be a signal. Caleb could not understand the gesture directly, but he understood the intention. They wanted him to respond. Slowly, Caleb nodded once, a human gesture of acknowledgement. The figure watched him for a moment, then stepped back into the shadows. Caleb realized something crucial. They were not intent on killing him. This was not an execution or attack. It was observation. Hours dragged on as he waited, bound and pressed against the tree. He used the time to study his surroundings. The forest was dense with life, but subtle technology hinted at intelligence. Small devices, camouflaged as rocks and branches, hummed faintly, emitting soft pulses that Caleb could barely sense. Whoever these beings were, they had tools humans had never encountered in the frontier. Caleb thought of the girl. Where was she? Had she warned them? Was she part of this test? The uncertainty gnawed at him, but he reminded himself that he could only control what he could control. Using patience and careful observation, he began experimenting again with the ropes. By shifting his weight slightly, then slowly twisting his body, he found that one knot was less secure than the others. Not much, but enough to work with. He also discovered that the tree itself was not entirely straight. He could use a small lever motion to apply pressure at the right points. Sun climbed high overhead, and Caleb's fingers were raw, but progress came in tiny increments. He tested the knot's resistance, memorized the angle, and imagined the sequence that would free him. Every movement had to be precise. One mistake could alert the watchers, whoever they were, and he might lose his only chance. Then the forest shifted. A sound like hundreds of tiny stones rolling in unison echoed softly. Shadows moved across the forest floor, faster than any human could run. Caleb froze. His captor, or observers, were close. He dared not look directly, fearing any sudden motion might be misinterpreted as aggression. Minutes passed. Nothing happened. The forest seemed to return to calm. Caleb let out a quiet breath he had been holding. This was a game of patience and intelligence, not strength. He reminded himself, humans survived in harsh worlds not because we were the strongest, but because we could think, adapt, and act in ways others did not expect. By mid-afternoon, Caleb felt a small victory. The knot that had held his torso was now loose enough that a well-timed wiggle might free him. He tested the knot once more, careful not to make noise. A faint hum filled the air again, like a song vibrating through the trees. Caleb realized it was a signal, a pattern in the vibrations. Perhaps it was communication. He tried mimicking it subtly, tapping his fingers on the rope in rhythm. The forest remained silent for a long moment. Then from the shadows, a low sound responded, not words, not anything he recognized, but a recognition of his attempt to interact. Caleb smiled faintly. He had made contact in a way. His mind raced with possibilities. Could he use intelligence rather than force to earn his freedom? Could he show that humans were clever, resourceful, and worthy of respect, rather than fear? As evening approached, the forest shifted in light and color. Caleb felt eyes watching him constantly, and he knew that any escape attempt needed perfect timing. He could not see the girl, but he sensed her presence. Somewhere she was part of this situation. Was she a guide? A warning? He did not know, but he resolved to be careful. Caleb's stomach growled again. Hunger and fatigue pressed in, but he forced himself to focus. His mind worked through angles, tools, sequences, and possibilities. He planned for every contingency, imagining the sequence that might allow him to slip free without provoking the observers. Night fell. The forest became shadowed, and the faint pulsing hums of alien devices glimmered like distant stars. Caleb leaned against the tree, muscles sore but mind alert. He knew one thing for certain: he would not remain a captive, not out of arrogance or bravado, but because survival was a human trait. Humans endured, adapted, and overcame. And as the stars appeared overhead, twinkling coldly and brilliantly in the alien sky, Caleb felt a surge of determination. Whoever had captured him, whoever watched him, he would prove that humans were more than mere intruders in the galaxy. He closed his eyes for a brief moment, imagining the girl who had drawn the symbols in the dust. Somehow, in some way, they were connected. Perhaps she had intended this. Perhaps she believed in human potential even before he did. Caleb tightened his jaw, testing the knots one last time before sleep claimed him. He felt a small movement, almost imperceptible, but enough to remind him that opportunity existed even in the tightest constraints. Tomorrow, he thought, he would act. And tomorrow, the game of observation and intelligence would continue, human ingenuity against alien scrutiny, with the stakes higher than life itself. Morning light filtered softly through the dense trees. Caleb Arden woke with a stiff neck and sore muscles, but a spark of determination ran through him. Last night's quiet observation had given him ideas. He now understood the patterns of the forest, the subtle movements, and the presence of the watchers. He knew he had to act, but carefully. He tested the ropes once more. The knot around his torso, which had seemed impossible to loosen before, had a slight give. A few careful shifts and wiggles, combined with subtle pressure from his legs against the tree roots, loosened it just enough to allow a tiny range of movement. It was not much, but it was something. Small victories mattered. Caleb realized that his captors, or observers, were not brute predators. They were precise, calculating, and interested in intelligence rather than sheer force. Whoever had bound him had underestimated one thing: human ingenuity. Humans had survived deserts, storms, and battles against creatures far stronger than themselves. They adapted, they thought, and Caleb was about to demonstrate that. Hours passed as he experimented with angles and subtle movements, testing the rope's response without making a sound. The forest remained alive with quiet observation, but the beings who had captured him did not intervene. Caleb realized that he could use their patience against them. He could study them as they studied him. Through tiny shifts, he finally freed one arm, just enough to reach a nearby vine that hung loosely from a tree branch. Using it like a lever, he created a small gap in the bindings around his torso. A second, careful movement freed the other arm. The relief was immense. Freedom was close, but he could not act recklessly. Caleb paused and listened. The forest was alive with the subtle hums he had noticed before, pulsing in rhythmic patterns. He began to understand them as a language, not one of words, but of vibration and tone. The watchers were communicating quietly among themselves. Perhaps he could respond in his own way. With deliberate calm, Caleb began tapping his fingers in a pattern that mirrored the pulses he felt. At first, nothing happened. Then a faint shift, a ripple in the vibration, acknowledged his attempt. He was interacting subtly with an alien intelligence far beyond what most humans had encountered. Hours passed in a strange, tense rhythm. Caleb moved cautiously, testing small motions, freeing his legs bit by bit, and creating leverage using tree roots and vines. He realized that his captors were curious, not hostile. They were assessing him. In a way, he felt almost respected. This was a test of skill and intelligence, not a fight to the death. By mid-afternoon, Caleb had freed himself completely from the tree. He stood carefully, stretching stiff muscles, and scanned the area. There was no sign of immediate danger, but he could sense the subtle signs of alien devices hidden in the trees and underbrush. He had observed them long enough to know that any misstep could alert the watchers. He moved slowly, deliberately, stepping lightly on the forest floor to avoid creating vibrations that might reveal his position too early. Every sound, every shadow was accounted for. This was not just escape. It was human strategy, precision, and patience in action. Caleb spotted a small clearing up ahead. From his previous observations, he knew it was a place where the alien girl, or her people, tended to linger. Perhaps they would see him as a threat if he approached directly, but Caleb had an idea. He gathered some leaves and vines, creating a crude decoy in the clearing. Then he moved silently to a position that offered both cover and observation. Minutes passed. A figure appeared, the girl. She moved with grace and care, her eyes scanning the clearing. She paused when she noticed the decoy, studied it, then seemed to understand something. Caleb could almost see the recognition in her posture. She was intelligent. She could interpret patterns, recognize strategy, and anticipate intent. Caleb stepped forward cautiously, hands raised in a gesture of peace. He did not speak. Words might confuse or provoke. Instead, he made deliberate, simple movements, pointing first to himself, then to the girl, then to the decoy. His meaning was clear. He was clever but not dangerous. The girl tilted her head. For a long moment she did not move. Then she took a step closer, testing him, studying him. Caleb mirrored her movements, slow and deliberate, showing that he understood caution and respect. The forest seemed to hold its breath. Finally, she extended a hand, not in aggression but in invitation. Caleb hesitated only a moment, then carefully moved toward her. Their eyes met, and for the first time he felt a connection, a mutual recognition of intelligence and intent. They were different species, yes, but they understood each other on a fundamental level. He gestured to his bindings, then to himself, indicating that he had freed himself and meant no harm. The girl responded with a small motion, a sign of acknowledgement and perhaps admiration. Caleb realized that this was more than a simple test. It was a lesson in communication, patience, and observation. Hours passed as Caleb and the girl communicated through gestures, symbols, and patterns. He began to understand more about her people. They valued intelligence, observation, and subtlety over brute strength. They did not attack without reason, and they respected cleverness. Humans, with their adaptability and curiosity, could earn respect even in this alien world. Caleb shared simple gestures of friendship, pointing to his supplies, offering food, showing his willingness to cooperate. The girl responded in kind, demonstrating symbols in the dirt, tapping patterns, and guiding him toward a small, hidden stream where the forest's energy seemed stronger. As the sun began to set, painting the forest in shades of gold and green, Caleb felt a surge of hope. He had not only survived, he had begun to earn trust. He understood now that this was the path to safety: intelligence, patience, and understanding. Not violence, not aggression. That was humanity's greatest strength here, just as it had been on countless worlds before. The girl led him to a small, natural shelter hidden by foliage. There were signs of previous visitors: smooth stones, carefully arranged, and faint marks in the dirt that indicated order and thought. Caleb studied everything, learning, observing, and adapting. Every detail mattered. That night he rested in the shelter, keeping one eye on the girl. He noticed small tools, strange devices, and symbols etched on stones. His mind worked, connecting patterns, forming strategies, and imagining how to use what he had learned. This was no ordinary forest. It was a living, intelligent environment, and he had just begun to understand its rules. Caleb also reflected on his journey. From the moment he had lifted the wounded girl onto his horse, his life had changed. He had acted out of compassion, and it had brought him into a world of challenges, tests, and intelligence far beyond human expectation. Yet he realized that the same human traits that had allowed him to survive on ardent III, observation, patience, adaptability, were the very traits that could turn peril into opportunity. As night deepened, the girl watched him with curiosity and something else, perhaps respect. Caleb understood that trust would take time, but this was a start. Humans were not just survivors, they were thinkers, planners, and learners. And in this forest against alien intelligence, those traits mattered more than strength. Before sleep claimed him, Caleb made a silent vow. He would not merely survive. He would prove that humanity's ingenuity could match any challenge, adapt to any situation, and earn respect even in a world far from home. And as the stars peeked through the canopy above, Caleb felt the thrill of possibility. The forest, the girl, the watchers, they were all part of a test. And he intended to pass it, not through force, but through intelligence, courage, and the uniquely human ability to adapt and overcome. Tomorrow he would take the next step. He would not only escape the forest, but begin a connection that could change the relationship between humans and this alien world. The path would be dangerous, yes, but for Caleb, it was a challenge he welcomed. Because humanity survived not by giving up. Humanity survived by thinking, by learning, and by daring to act where others hesitated. And Caleb Arden, rancher, survivor, and human, was about to demonstrate that in full. The forest was alive in a way that Caleb had begun to understand, but it still held mysteries. The wind carried whispers of movement, leaves shimmered with light he could barely perceive, and the pulsing hums from unseen devices continued, steady and subtle. Caleb Arden felt alert, every sense tuned, but this time he was not a prisoner. He was a participant. The alien girl, whose name he had not yet learned, led him carefully through the forest. She moved silently, stepping on hidden paths that Caleb would have missed if he had walked alone. He followed, noting every pattern, every subtle shift in the environment. This forest was not just alive, it was a network. Every movement had a purpose, every sound a meaning. Caleb realized that the girl was testing him as much as the forest was. Each obstacle, each strange device, was an opportunity to demonstrate human ingenuity. And he intended to take advantage of everyone. They reached a small clearing, circular and open, with smooth stones arranged in intricate patterns. Devices hummed softly from concealed positions, their light barely noticeable. The girl stopped and gestured toward the arrangement. Caleb studied it carefully. It appeared to be some kind of puzzle or communication system, a network of signals and responses. Caleb knelt, examining the stones. They were arranged deliberately, forming patterns that seemed to mirror the vibrations he had felt in the forest. He tapped lightly on one stone and a faint hum responded. Another tap, another response. Soon he understood the sequence. It was a language, simple, logical, and precise, but unlike any language he had encountered. He continued experimenting, observing, and learning. The girl watched silently, her large eyes attentive, tracking every movement. Caleb realized something remarkable. This was not merely a test of escape or survival. It was an invitation to participate, to demonstrate intelligence and understanding. Hours passed as he deciphered the system. Each correct interaction caused the stones to emit a brighter light, forming patterns that mirrored the constellations above. Caleb understood that this was a demonstration of connectivity, of intelligence, and of recognition. He was communicating, not with words but with patterns, rhythm, and logic. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the stones pulsed in perfect harmony. Light rippled across the clearing, and the hums shifted into a melodic tone. Caleb realized the significance. He had succeeded. The alien girl's people, whoever they were acknowledging him. He had passed a test not by force, not by aggression, but by intelligence, observation, and understanding. The girl stepped closer, her gesture inviting him to follow. Caleb did so cautiously, moving with respect and awareness. She led him through narrow paths, over roots and rocks, until they reached a small hidden settlement. Simple structures, organic and flowing with the environment, were scattered among the trees. Lights pulsed softly, illuminating paths and workspaces. Caleb's eyes widened. The place was alive with quiet energy and intelligence. Aliens of his own size and shape, similar to the girl, moved with purpose. Some carried tools, others observed him curiously. They were cautious but not hostile. Every detail in the settlement reflected intelligence, organization, and care. The girl stopped near a central structure. Caleb studied the symbols etched into the walls, patterns, shapes, and lines that seemed to convey information and history. This was more than a forest. It was a civilization hidden among the trees, and he had been allowed to enter. One of the aliens approached, slightly taller with a calm presence. They observed Caleb closely, tilting their head, and then made a series of gestures that the girl mirrored. Caleb watched carefully, then responded using the gestures he had learned. The exchange was slow, deliberate, but meaningful. He felt a strange thrill. He was communicating with an entirely new species, not with words but with intelligence. The taller alien examined him further, then stepped back. The girl guided Caleb to a small table-like structure where devices hummed softly. Caleb noticed that they were tools for observation and measurement, not weapons. These beings valued information, not destruction. Caleb gestured toward the devices, then to himself, indicating curiosity and a desire to learn. The girl responded with a nod, and the taller alien made a small approving sound. Caleb felt a surge of satisfaction. This was the moment he had been preparing for, a demonstration of human ingenuity, patience, and intelligence. Over the next hours, Caleb explored the settlement, observing how the aliens worked, communicated, and interacted. He learned small patterns, subtle cues, and the logic behind their devices. Every observation built upon the last. He realized that his adaptability, the human trait that allowed survival on harsh worlds, was now his greatest asset. The girl guided him to a small chamber filled with images of the forest, the stars, and distant planets. Caleb studied them carefully. He noticed a pattern. These aliens had observed many worlds, many species, but none seemed to combine intelligence, patience, and adaptability the way humans did. He understood then why he had been brought here, why the trap had existed, why the forest had tested him. This was an assessment, a recognition that humans were not merely intruders. Humans had qualities that could not be measured by strength or technology alone. Night fell, and the settlement glowed softly with gentle light. Caleb realized he was no longer a prisoner. He was a participant, a guest, and perhaps even a representative of humanity. The forest and its people had allowed him entry because he had proven the qualities they valued most: observation, intelligence, and courage. The girl sat beside him, tapping patterns in the dirt. Caleb responded, creating sequences that mirrored the vibrations he had felt in the forest. They communicated silently, exchanging ideas and understanding. He realized something profound. Humans could adapt, learn, and build bridges even with species completely unlike their own. Caleb also understood the responsibilities that came with this trust. His actions would reflect not only on him, but on all humans. The future of human contact with this species, and perhaps others, depended on what he did next. He felt the weight of that responsibility keenly, but he welcomed it. By morning, Caleb had mapped much of the settlement in his mind, understood key patterns, and learned how to move without alarming the watchers. He realized that the next step would require more than observation. It would require collaboration, problem-solving, and the demonstration of uniquely human ingenuity. The girl led him to a small device, unlike anything Caleb had seen. It pulsed with light, responded to subtle vibrations, and seemed to change based on thought and intent. Caleb studied it carefully, experimenting with patterns and gestures. Each correct action caused a ripple of acknowledgement from the device, and the girl watched, clearly impressed by his understanding. Hours passed as he explored the device, tested sequences, and observed responses. Caleb realized that this was a test of trust as much as intelligence. The aliens had given him access to a tool that could influence their systems, and his behavior now would determine the depth of that trust. Finally, after a careful sequence of movements and gestures, the device responded fully, emitting a soft harmonic tone. Caleb felt a thrill. He had not only survived the forest and the trap, but had now earned the respect of the alien society. The girl's eyes shone with acknowledgement, and even the taller alien gave a subtle approving gesture. Caleb understood then that humans were more than mere survivors. Humans could think, adapt, learn, and earn respect in ways that others might not anticipate. His journey had begun with a simple act of compassion, lifting a wounded girl onto his horse, but it had led him to demonstrate the very best qualities of humanity: intelligence, patience, and ingenuity. As the stars appeared above the canopy, Caleb Arden felt a profound sense of possibility. He had passed tests, demonstrated human skill, and begun to build a bridge between species. Tomorrow, he would face new challenges, but he would do so armed with knowledge, respect, and the uniquely human ability to think and adapt, because humanity's greatest strength was not weapons or size. It was cleverness, resilience, and the courage to act thoughtfully in the face of the unknown. And Caleb Arden, rancher, survivor, and human, was about to show that in full. The first light of dawn crept through the forest canopy, painting the settlement in soft gold and green. Caleb Arden stretched, muscles still stiff from the previous days, but his mind was alert and focused. He had come far since the day he had lifted the wounded alien girl onto his horse. He had survived a trap, earned the trust of an alien people, and now stood on the edge of an opportunity that could change humanity's place in this distant frontier. The girl approached him, moving with her usual grace and quiet determination. She carried a small device in her hands, a communication tool Caleb had been allowed to study. She placed it on the ground before him, and Caleb understood instantly. She wanted him to send a message, not to her people but to his own, to humans. Caleb knelt and examined the device. Symbols glowed faintly, responding to touch and movement. He traced patterns in the air, tested sequences, and watched the reactions. Slowly, he realized that this device could bridge worlds. It could transmit not only words, but understanding, showing humans that this species was intelligent, peaceful, and capable of collaboration. For the first time, Caleb felt the full weight of responsibility. He had been tested, yes, but the test had led to trust. If he acted wisely, humanity could establish a place of respect in this corner of the galaxy. If he failed, misunderstandings could close doors that had just been opened. He looked to the girl, whose large eyes reflected the morning light. She tilted her head as if encouraging him, offering trust without expectation. Caleb smiled faintly. That trust would not be wasted. He began crafting a message. Simple gestures, symbols, and sequences represented ideas of peace, intelligence, and cooperation. He incorporated patterns he had learned from the forest, the pulsing hums, and the devices. He hoped the message would convey not only human thought, but human respect for life and intelligence. Hours passed as Caleb refined the message. Each adjustment caused subtle changes in the device's glow, as though the alien technology itself were responding, assessing, approving. The girl stayed near, occasionally demonstrating sequences he had not yet discovered. Caleb watched carefully, learning and adapting. Finally, the device pulsed strongly, emitting harmonic tones that resonated through the clearing. Caleb felt a thrill of success. The message was complete. It would reach human explorers in nearby sectors, informing them that this alien species was not only intelligent, but willing to establish connections. But Caleb knew that communication alone was not enough. Trust must be reinforced through action. He rose and followed the girl deeper into the settlement. She led him to a larger chamber where other aliens observed quietly. Caleb bowed slightly, a human gesture of respect, and then gestured toward himself and the humans he represented. The taller alien from before stepped forward. They examined Caleb carefully, tilting their head, then made a sequence of gestures that he had learned to understand: recognition, approval, and invitation. Caleb mirrored the gestures, slow and deliberate, showing understanding and respect. The exchange was simple, yet profound. Caleb realized something important. Humans had not yet established a reputation in this part of the galaxy. Other species would judge them by their actions, their intelligence, and their willingness to cooperate. By acting thoughtfully, calmly, and with ingenuity, he could shape that perception. The girl led him to a small platform overlooking the forest. From there, Caleb could see beyond the settlement, where the plains stretched into the horizon, dotted with alien flora and natural formations. He realized that this place was more than a home for this species. It was a hub of knowledge, observation, and survival. By connecting with it, humans could learn, adapt, and thrive in ways they had not imagined. Caleb took a deep breath. The journey from the day he had lifted the wounded girl to this moment had been difficult, tense, and at times frightening. Yet it had also revealed the qualities that defined humanity: intelligence, patience, courage, and the ability to understand others without forcing dominance. He turned to the girl and gestured toward the forest. Slowly, deliberately, he indicated that he wished to leave with knowledge, friendship, and mutual understanding. The girl studied him for a long moment, then nodded. It was a small gesture but filled with meaning. Humans had proven themselves worthy. Over the next few days, Caleb worked alongside the aliens, learning their methods, observing their patterns, and demonstrating human ingenuity. He helped construct small communication tools, devised ways to share information, and even introduced minor improvements using human logic and experience. The aliens responded with curiosity and admiration, adjusting their methods subtly to incorporate his ideas. Word of Caleb's intelligence, patience, and respect spread through the settlement. Other aliens approached cautiously, observing him, then interacting when they understood he was not a threat. Slowly, human ingenuity began to earn recognition. Caleb realized that this was a pivotal moment. Humanity's survival in new worlds had always depended on adaptability. Here on Ardent III, adaptability took a new form, understanding alien intelligence, learning their methods, and earning trust through thought and respect rather than force. Finally, it was time to leave. Caleb prepared for the journey back to human settlements, carrying knowledge, devices, and the promise of communication. The girl accompanied him to the forest edge, standing silently, her large eyes reflecting pride, curiosity, and a deep recognition of human potential. Caleb mounted Braun, who had been brought back by the girl's subtle guidance. He took one last look at the settlement, the forest, and the creatures that had tested and trusted him. He felt a surge of respect and admiration. This world and its people were now connected to humanity, not through conquest, but through understanding and ingenuity. As he rode toward the open plains, Caleb reflected on the journey. From the simple act of helping a wounded girl, he had faced danger, solved problems, learned new ways of thinking, and demonstrated the qualities that made humans unique. Intelligence, patience, courage, and the ability to adapt, these were humanity's greatest strengths. The plain stretched endlessly before him, golden in the morning light. Caleb knew that other challenges awaited. Human settlements would encounter more alien species, unexplored worlds, and unpredictable circumstances. Yet he also knew that the lesson of Ardent III would endure. Humans could face the unknown not with force alone, but with thought, respect, and ingenuity. By midday, Caleb reached the edge of the forest. He stopped, looking back one last time. The girl stood there watching silently, her posture calm and proud. Caleb raised a hand in farewell. She nodded. It was a simple exchange, but it carried meaning far beyond words. Humans and aliens could coexist, learn from each other, and build a shared future. Caleb set Braun into a steady trot, carrying both the girl's message and the lesson of trust, intelligence, and patience. As the wind rushed past him, he felt a profound sense of hope. Humanity had survived on countless worlds, but here they had begun to earn respect. That was a new kind of victory, one that relied not on weapons, strength, or luck, but on qualities that made humans exceptional. By evening, Caleb reached a small ridge overlooking the plains. In the distance, human settlements were faintly visible, smoke rising from chimneys, lights twinkling as the sun set. He knew that his story, his experience, would change humanity's approach to the galaxy. It was a story of caution, observation, and intelligence. It was a story of trust earned through action. Caleb paused, letting the wind cool his face. He had survived. He had learned. And he had demonstrated that humanity's greatest strength was not just survival. It was ingenuity, curiosity, and the courage to act thoughtfully in the face of the unknown. He rode down the ridge, feeling the steady rhythm of bronze hooves against the ground. In the distance, the girl's settlement shimmered faintly among the trees, a symbol of the connection he had forged. Caleb knew that humanity had made its first mark in this corner of the galaxy, not through dominance, but through understanding, intelligence, and heart. As stars began to appear in the deepening sky, Caleb Arden, rancher and human, felt the thrill of possibility. The galaxy was vast, full of unknown worlds and intelligent beings. But he had shown that humans could rise to any challenge, communicate across difference, and earn respect through action and thought. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new worlds, and new opportunities. But for today, Caleb rode forward with a sense of accomplishment, hope, and pride. Humanity had begun a new chapter in the stars, not as conquerors, but as thinkers, learners, and beings worthy of recognition. And somewhere in the forest of Ardent III, the girl watched, silently acknowledging the bond they had formed. Caleb smiled faintly to himself. This was only the beginning.